66 million years ago, in a humid forest at the edge of a river, the ground begins to shake. Not a tremor, a rhythm, heavy, deliberate footfalls, each one landing with the weight of a truck, moving closer through the trees. Every creature in that forest knows exactly what that sound means. It means the largest land predator that has ever walked the earth is hunting. It means run, and so they run. The small ones scatter into the undergrowth. The fast ones bolt for open ground. Because in this world, when the tyrant comes, survival has only ever meant one thing: putting as much distance between yourself and those jaws as your legs can manage. But not everything runs. In a clearing ahead, one animal hears the same footsteps, feels the same trembling earth, and it does something that no other creature in this entire world would dare to do. It turns. It lowers its head. It plants its feet into the soil. And it points 3 long, sharpened horns directly at the sound of the approaching king. It is not going to run. It is going to fight. And in the next few minutes, one of these 2 giants is going to die. This is the story of the one dinosaur on Earth that did not fear the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The single animal built not to flee from the tyrant, but to defeat it. We have the fossils. We have the scars. We have the evidence of their wars written into ancient bone. And by the end of this, you will understand why, in the final days of the age of dinosaurs, even a king had reason to be afraid. Before we can talk about the one creature that could bring it down, we have to understand exactly what we are dealing with. Because to appreciate the courage, or perhaps the desperation of the animal that stood its ground, you first have to grasp the sheer, overwhelming horror of the thing it chose to face. Tyrannosaurus Rex. The name itself is a promise. It means tyrant lizard king, and for once, the name is not an exaggeration. This was the apex predator of its world, the undisputed ruler of the land in the final chapter of the age of dinosaurs, roughly 68 to 66 million years ago. And even after more than a century of discovery, after countless larger and stranger dinosaurs have been dug out of the rock, T-Rex remains the animal that defines the word monster in the human imagination. There is a reason for that. The reason is that it earned it. Let's build the tyrant, piece by piece. A fully grown Tyrannosaurus Rex stretched around 12 to 13 meters from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail, roughly the length of a city bus. It stood tall enough to look into a second-story window, and it weighed somewhere in the region of 8 tons, possibly more. That is 8,000 kilograms of muscle, bone, and appetite, balanced on 2 enormous, pillar-like legs, moving through the forests and floodplains of ancient North America. But size alone does not make a legend. Plenty of dinosaurs were larger. What made Rex the stuff of nightmares was its head, and specifically what that head could do. The skull of a large Tyrannosaurus Rex was around 1.5 meters long, a massive, reinforced structure built to withstand incredible stress, and lining its jaws were teeth unlike anything else in the predatory world. Not the thin, blade-like slicing teeth of most large meat-eaters, designed to slash flesh. No, T-Rex had teeth like bananas thick, conical, deeply rooted spikes, some of them approaching 30 centimeters long when you include the root. These were not knives. They were bone crushers. And that leads us to the single most terrifying fact about this animal: its bite. Scientists have studied the mechanics of the T-Rex skull for decades, and the conclusion is staggering. Tyrannosaurus Rex possessed one of the most powerful bites of any land animal that has ever existed. The estimates vary, as all such estimates must, but even the conservative figures describe a bite force capable of crushing solid bone. Not tearing flesh-crushing bone, reducing the skeleton of its prey to splinters. We know this is true because we have found the evidence in the fossilized dung of Tyrannosaurus Rex droppings packed with the pulverized bone fragments of the animals it had eaten, ground, and shattered by a bite so powerful it could break a skeleton apart from the inside. Think about what that means. Most predators kill their prey and then carefully strip the meat from the bones. Rex ate the bones. It could bite down through the spine of a large dinosaur and simply crush it. There was no defense of thick hide, no protection of heavy bone that could reliably withstand that kind of force. And it was not a mindless killing machine either. This was a sophisticated hunter. Its skull was structured to give it powerful binocular vision, meaning its eyes faced forward, allowing it to judge distance and depth with precision, exactly the kind of vision a predator needs to time an attack. The region of its brain devoted to smell was enormously developed, suggesting it could detect the scent of prey or of a carcass from a great distance. It could see you. It could smell you. And when it found you, it could crush you. For years, some argued that Rex was merely a scavenger, a giant vulture stumbling across the dead. That debate has largely settled. The best evidence now points to T-Rex being both an active, formidable hunter and an opportunistic scavenger. In other words, it ate whatever it wanted, however it could get it, and nothing in its world was in a position to argue. So here is the picture we are left with. An 8-ton predator, as long as a bus, with forward-facing eyes to hunt you and a nose to track you across the landscape, armed with a bite powerful enough to crush your skeleton into fragments. In the world of the late Cretaceous, this was the closest thing to an unstoppable force that the land had ever produced. Every animal that shared its world lived under its shadow. Every animal ran, every animal but one. Imagine you are a creature living in the world of Tyrannosaurus Rex. You have one overwhelming problem to solve. How do you avoid being crushed and eaten by an 8-ton monster with a bone-shattering bite? For almost every animal in that ecosystem, evolution offered the same answer. Speed, stealth, numbers, hiding. The strategy of the prey has always been, and remains today. Avoidance, be somewhere else. Be too small to bother with. Be too fast to catch. Do not, under any circumstances, allow yourself to end up face-to-face with the tyrant. But evolution is endlessly creative, and it does not always reach for the same solution. And in the very same time and place where T-Rex ruled in the ancient floodplains of what is now Western North America, in the final 2 million years before the dinosaurs' extinction there, lived an animal that took the opposite path entirely. It did not evolve to run faster. It did not evolve to hide. It evolved to fight back. And it became so good at fighting back that it may be the only creature in the entire history of the dinosaurs genuinely capable of killing a healthy adult Tyrannosaurus Rex in single combat. That animal was Triceratops. You know its shape, even if you've never learned its name. The 3 horns. The enormous bony frill sweeping back from its skull like a shield. The heavy, rhinoceros-like body. Triceratops is one of the most recognizable dinosaurs that ever lived, an icon carved into the imagination of every child who ever loved these creatures. But familiarity has a way of softening a monster. We think of Triceratops as the gentle giant, the noble plant eater, the peaceful counterpart to the vicious T-Rex, and that image could not be more wrong. Triceratops was not gentle. Triceratops was a walking fortress armed with 3 spears, and it lived in a world where the alternative to fighting was being eaten alive. Make no mistake, this was one of the most heavily armed animals that has ever walked the earth. And crucially, this is the detail that makes the whole story possible. Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus Rex were not just from the same broad era. They were true contemporaries. They lived in the same places, at the same time, walking the same riverbanks and the same forest edges in the final days of the Cretaceous. Their worlds overlapped completely, which means these 2 animals did not merely exist in the same textbook. They met, they saw each other, and, as we will see from the fossil evidence, they fought. This is what makes the Rex versus Triceratops matchup so special, and so unlike almost any other predator versus prey story in the fossil record. Usually, we can only guess at how ancient animals interacted. We reconstruct the drama from indirect clues. But here, we have something extraordinarily rare. We have direct, physical, fossilized evidence of these 2 titans in conflict scars, bite marks. and healed wounds preserved in stone for 66 million years. We are not imagining their war. We are reading its aftermath. Let's build this animal the way we built the tyrant, and you'll begin to understand why, of all the creatures in T-Rex's world, Triceratops was the one that could look the king in the eye and refuse to run. A full-grown Triceratops measured around 8 to 9 meters in length, not quite as long as a large T-Rex, but built along completely different lines. Where T-Rex was tall and bipedal, Triceratops was low, broad, and massively heavy, standing on 4 thick, powerful legs. Estimates of its weight range considerably, but many place a large Triceratops somewhere between 6 and 12 tons. Sit with that number. This was an animal that could weigh as much as, or even more than, the Tyrannosaurus Rex that hunted it. This was not a case of a small, helpless herbivore against a giant predator. This was a clash of two heavyweights, roughly matched in mass, and each armed with weapons of its own. But Triceratops' real advantage was not simply its size. It was where evolution had concentrated all of that power. Because everything about the front end of this animal, its skull, its horns, its frill, the entire architecture of its head was built for one purpose: defense, and, when necessary, attack. Let's talk about the weapons. Because Triceratops carried an arsenal on its face unlike anything else in its world. And to understand how it could challenge a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you have to understand each piece of it. Start with the horns, because the horns are the reason this animal has a fighting chance at all. Triceratops carried 3 of them. There was a shorter horn positioned on its snout, above the nostrils, a stout, thick weapon, useful in a shoving match or a close-quarters clash. But it was the other 2 that transformed this animal from a large herbivore into something genuinely dangerous. Above each eye, projecting forward from the brow, Triceratops grew a pair of enormous horns. In a large adult, these brow horns could exceed a meter in length. A meter. 2 forward-facing spears, each roughly the length of a person's leg, mounted on the front of an animal weighing several tons. And here is a crucial detail that most people miss. What we find as fossils is the bony core of those horns. But in life, that bone would have been sheathed in keratin, the same tough material that makes up the horns of a modern bull, the hooves of a horse, and your own fingernails. Keratin doesn't just cover a horn, it extends it and sharpens it, which means the horns of a living Triceratops were very likely longer and considerably sharper than the bare bone we dig out of the ground. The real weapons were more formidable than the fossils alone suggest. Now put those 2 brow horns in motion. Picture the mechanism: a Triceratops weighing 8 tons, driving forward on 4 powerful legs, all of that mass and momentum focused into 2 sharpened points aimed directly ahead. This is not a defensive gesture. This is a battering ram tipped with spears. The physics of it are brutal. When a several-ton animal drives forward and concentrates its entire body weight into 2 narrow points, the force delivered at those points is immense, more than enough to punch through hide, through muscle, and deep into the vital organs of even the largest predator. A well-aimed thrust from a Triceratops could disembowel an attacker. It could shatter ribs. It could drive up into the chest and stop a heart. To find a living comparison, look at the animals we consider dangerous today. A rhinoceros can flip a vehicle and kill a lion. A Cape buffalo, armed with far smaller horns than Triceratops carried, is one of the most feared animals in Africa, responsible for killing hunters who underestimated it. A bull moose can shatter bone with its antlers. Now take the raw defensive fury of those animals and scale it up to the size of an elephant. Mount 2-meter-long spears on its face, and drop it into a world where the only alternative to fighting is being eaten. That is Triceratops. It was not built to be prey. It was built to make predators regret their choice of target. And the horns were only the offensive half of the equation. Because behind those horns, sweeping up and back from the rear of the skull, was the structure that gave Triceratops its unmistakable silhouette. The frill. An enormous shelf of bone, in a large individual stretching up to and even beyond a meter across, framing the head like a great shield. And the frill is where the story of this animal gets genuinely fascinating, because scientists have argued for well over a century about what exactly that magnificent structure was for. But before we get into that debate, hold on to the full picture of what we've assembled. An animal the weight of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or heavier. Low to the ground and impossible to knock over. Standing on four legs like the foundations of a building. Armed with two forward-facing horns over a meter long, sharpened by keratin, backed by tons of driving muscle, and crowned with a massive shield of bone protecting its neck and shoulders. When you lay it out like that, a question begins to form. We call T-Rex the ultimate predator, but was Triceratops the ultimate anti-predator? An animal evolved, from horn to frill, specifically to survive an encounter with the deadliest hunter of its age? The frill holds the key to answering that. So let's finally solve it. The frill of Triceratops is one of the great puzzles of dinosaur science, and the debate over its purpose tells you something important about how paleontology actually works, because the honest answer is that it probably did more than one thing at once, and scientists are still working out the balance. For a long time, the intuitive explanation was the obvious one. It's a shield. Look at where it sits, sweeping back over the vulnerable neck and shoulders. Exactly the region a predator like T-Rex would target to deliver a killing bite. A great plate of bone in precisely that spot looks, at first glance, like armor. And there is genuine logic to that idea. A predator attacking a Triceratops from the front would have to get past not only the horns, but this enormous bony barrier guarding the throat and neck. But the picture is more complicated than a simple shield, and this is where good science refuses to give us the easy answer. In many of Triceratops's close relatives, other horned dinosaurs, the frill was not a solid slab of bone at all. It was pierced by large openings, big holes in the bone that would have been useless for stopping a bite. A frill full of windows is not much of a shield. This has led many scientists to argue that the frill's primary purpose across horned dinosaurs as a group was not defense at all, but display. A billboard. A structure for showing off, for intimidating rivals, for attracting mates, and for allowing members of the same species to recognize one another at a distance. In this view, the frill was less like a knight's shield and more like a peacock's tail, a signal grown large and dramatic to send a message. And yet here is where Triceratops itself becomes especially interesting. Because Triceratops, unlike many of its frilled cousins, had a frill that was largely solid bone, without those great weakening openings. That's a real and meaningful difference. Whatever the frill did for other horned dinosaurs, in Triceratops specifically, it was a more robust, more substantial structure. And a solid shelf of bone protecting the neck of an animal that regularly faced the most powerful bite in the ecosystem is a very suggestive thing to find. So which was it? Shield or signal? The most honest and most likely answer, the one the evidence points toward, is both and more. Evolution is a relentless economist, and structures often serve multiple purposes at once. The frill could advertise the animal's health and maturity to potential mates, help members of a herd recognize their own kind, intimidate rivals in disputes, and, in the specific case of solid-frilled Triceratops, also provide a genuine measure of protection to the neck when a predator came calling. It did not have to be one thing. It could be a billboard and a bulwark at the same time. And there is one more clue hidden in these frills, a clue that speaks directly to violence. When paleontologists examine the frills and horns of Triceratops fossils, they frequently find damage, puncture marks, scrapes, healed injuries. Now, some of that damage tells a surprising story. It appears that Triceratops may have fought each other, jousting and locking horns in contests over territory or mates, much as deer and antelope and bighorn sheep do today. The pattern of certain injuries is consistent with two Triceratops facing off, horns clashing, frills absorbing the blows. which means this animal was not only armed against predators, it was armed against its own kind, and it used those weapons. Think about what that implies. If Triceratops routinely used its horns in combat against other multi-ton, similarly armed Triceratops and survived, healing from the wounds, then those horns were not decorative. They were battle-tested. This was an animal that knew how to fight, that had the instincts and the experience of driving its horns into a living, resisting opponent. That is not the profile of a passive plant eater waiting to be eaten. That is the profile of a warrior. Now take that battle-hardened warrior, with its meter-long horns and its solid shield of bone and its several tons of driving muscle, and place it into the one relationship that defines its existence: its relationship with the tyrant. To understand how those two animals collided, we first have to walk through the world they shared, the strange, humid, vanished landscape where this ancient war played out. To witness the war between the tyrant and the fortress, you would have to travel back to the very end of the age of dinosaurs, to the final stretch of the Cretaceous period, roughly 66 million years ago. And the place you'd want to stand is a region of western North America that geologists today call the Hell Creek Formation. The name is fitting, though it comes from the rock, not the reputation. Because for these two animals, this was home, and it was one of the most important dinosaur ecosystems the world has ever preserved. Forget the barren, rocky badlands where we find these fossils today. 66 million years ago, this was a lush, warm, humid world. Picture a vast coastal floodplain, threaded with slow, winding rivers that snake their way toward a great inland sea. The climate was warm and wet, closer to a subtropical landscape than anything in that region now. Dense forests of flowering plants, conifers, and ferns crowded the riverbanks. The air would have been thick and humid, alive with the buzz of insects, the calls of early birds, and the low, resonant sounds of enormous animals moving through the undergrowth. This was a rich world, a productive world, and it teemed with life. Herds of duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, like the large Edmontosaurus, moved through the floodplains in great numbers, grazing on the abundant plant life. Small, swift predators darted through the underbrush. Armored dinosaurs trundled along, protected by their bony plates. Overhead, pterosaurs and early birds crossed the skies. In the rivers lurked crocodilians and turtles. It was a complete, thriving ecosystem, a final flourishing of dinosaurian life in the last days before the end. And presiding over all of it, at the very top of the food chain, was Tyrannosaurus Rex. In this ecosystem, Rex was the dominant predator, and the sheer number of Rex fossils we've recovered from these rocks tells us it was not a rare, marginal animal. It was a central, defining presence in this world. The tyrant was everywhere, and its favored prey included the herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs, animals built to flee, whose defense was numbers and speed, not resistance. But sharing this same landscape, walking these same riverbanks, was Triceratops. And here the fossil record delivers a striking fact. In the Hell Creek Formation, Triceratops is not some rare curiosity. It is astonishingly abundant. In fact, by many counts, Triceratops is one of the most common large dinosaurs found in these rocks, so common that it clearly was a major, thriving component of this ecosystem, present in enormous numbers alongside the tyrant that hunted it. These two animals were not occasional acquaintances. They were constant neighbors, sharing the same world day after day, generation after generation, for the better part of 2 million years. Now, an interesting question arises from all those Triceratops fossils. Did they live in herds, like the duckbills, using safety in numbers? The honest answer is that the evidence is limited and debated. Unlike some of their horned relatives, which we find in massive bone beds containing dozens or hundreds of individuals, clear evidence of enormous herds, Triceratops is most often found alone. That could mean it was more solitary than its cousins. But we have at least found a small group of young Triceratops buried together, which hints that they may have banded together, at least when they were juveniles and most vulnerable. So the picture is uncertain, perhaps largely solitary as adults, perhaps social when young. We should be careful not to overstate what we don't know. But whether it lived alone or in small groups, one thing is clear. Every adult Triceratops in this ecosystem, walking these humid floodplains, lived every single day within the range of the most dangerous predator on the planet. Encounters were not a rare, dramatic exception. They were a fact of life. And over those 2 million years, on countless occasions, a hungry tyrant and a horned fortress came face to face. We don't have to imagine whether it happened. We know it happened, because those encounters left scars, and those scars survived. This is the heart of the story. This is the part where we move from reconstruction and reasoning into something far rarer and far more thrilling, hard, physical evidence of two extinct titans in conflict. Because when it comes to Tyrannosaurus Rex and Triceratops, we are not merely speculating about whether they fought. We have found the proof, frozen in fossilized bone. Let's start with the most important category of evidence, and the most dramatic. Healed wounds. Paleontologists have examined the frills and skulls of Triceratops specimens and found something remarkable. On some of these fossils, there are injuries, punctures, and bite marks whose size, shape, and spacing match the teeth of Tyrannosaurus Rex. That alone would be striking. But there's a detail that transforms these marks from a curiosity into a story. On certain specimens, the bone around those bite marks shows signs of healing. Healing means only one thing. It means the Triceratops was alive when it received those wounds. It means a Tyrannosaurus Rex bit into this animal and the Triceratops survived. It walked away. Its body repaired the damage over weeks and months, growing new bone over the injury, and it lived long enough for that healing to be recorded permanently in its skeleton. Sit with the weight of that. A Triceratops was attacked by the most powerful predator in its world, an animal capable of crushing bone, and it did not die. It endured the attack, drove off or escaped the tyrant, and survived to heal. That is direct fossil evidence that these encounters did not always end the way you'd expect. Sometimes the prey won. Sometimes the fortress held. The horned dinosaur that stood its ground could and did walk away from a battle with Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now let's look at the other side of the evidence, because paleontology demands that we be complete and honest, and not every encounter went the Triceratops way. On other Triceratops fossils, scientists have found a very different pattern of damage. On the frill and neck region of some specimens, there are marks that tell the story of a Rex feeding pull marks and bite traces suggesting the predator had gripped the frill and was repositioning its jaws, apparently working to get at the rich muscles of the neck. Some researchers have interpreted this as evidence of a gruesome but efficient feeding strategy. A T-Rex tugging on the frill to access the nutritious meat where the head met the body. These marks generally show no signs of healing, which tells us this Triceratops was already dead. This is the record of a meal, not a fight survived. So the two categories of evidence together paint a complete and startlingly vivid picture. Sometimes, Rex attacked Triceratops and lost. The horned dinosaur survived, its wounds healing over. And sometimes, Rex attacked Triceratops and won, feeding on the carcass, leaving its tooth marks in the frill. This was not a one-sided slaughter, and it was not a foregone conclusion. It was a genuine contest, a real war with victories and defeats on both sides, playing out across 2 million years and countless individual encounters. We are not looking at predator and helpless prey. We are looking at two evenly matched combatants, and a fight that could go either way. There's something almost haunting about this evidence. Think about what these fossils actually are. That healed bite mark on a Triceratops frill is a specific moment in deep time, made permanent. On some particular day, 66 million years ago, a specific Triceratops and a specific Tyrannosaurus Rex met in a forest or on a riverbank, and there was violence, and the Triceratops lived. We will never know the details, the exact circumstances, whether the Triceratops was defending its young, whether it was cornered or chose to fight, but we know it happened, because we are holding the scar in our hands. These are not statistics. They are individual stories of survival, recorded in bone, waiting 66 million years for someone to read them. And this is what elevates the T-Rex versus Triceratops matchup above almost every other predator-prey relationship in the entire fossil record. For most extinct animals, we can only guess at how they interacted. Here, we don't have to guess. The horns, the frill, the healed wounds, the feeding traces, all of it converges on a single, powerful conclusion. Triceratops was not just theoretically capable of fighting T-Rex, it actually did. Repeatedly, and it sometimes won. So let's take everything we now know, the anatomy, the weapons, the physics, and the hard evidence of real battles, and reconstruct what one of these encounters may actually have looked like. Not a fantasy, a grounded, evidence-based vision of the greatest duel the ancient world ever staged. The sun is beginning to set over the Cretaceous floodplain. A single Triceratops moves slowly along the edge of a forest, cropping low plants with its sharp, parrot-like beak, its massive head swinging gently as it feeds. It is a mature adult, several tons of muscle and bone, its two brow horns worn and battle-scarred from a lifetime of disputes with its own kind. It is not afraid. In this landscape, it has little reason to be. But the wind shifts, and on that shifting air comes a scent that changes everything. The Triceratops freezes. Deep in its brain, an ancient alarm is ringing. It knows this smell. And somewhere in the tree line, a pair of forward-facing eyes has already locked onto its position. The Tyrannosaurus Rex has been hunting all day, and it is hungry. It has been shadowing the Triceratops for some time, moving with a stealth that seems impossible for an animal so large, using the cover of the forest, closing the distance. It has weighed its options with the instinct of a born predator. A lone adult Triceratops is dangerous prey. The tyrant knows this, perhaps from its own scars, perhaps from a lifetime of learning what those horns can do. But it is also a mountain of meat, enough to feed the tyrant for days. And so the calculation is made. The risk is worth it. The hunt is on. The Triceratops does not run. This is the decision that defines it, the choice that separates it from every duckbill and every small dinosaur in this world. It cannot outrun a T-Rex, and some deep instinct knows this. So instead, it does the only thing that gives it a chance. It turns to face the threat head-on. It swings its massive frilled head toward the predator, plants its four powerful legs, lowers its horns, and prepares to fight for its life. Everything now depends on the front of this animal, on keeping those horns, that shield, that armored face, always pointed directly at the tyrant. Because here is the strategic truth of this duel, and it's beautiful in its simplicity. Triceratops's entire defense faces forward. The horns, the frill, the reinforced skull, all of it protects the front. But its flanks, its sides, its legs, its belly, these are soft, vulnerable, undefended. If the T-Rex can get to the side of the Triceratops, if it can flank the fortress, it can deliver a crippling, bone-crushing bite to a leg or the body, and the fight is as good as over. So the entire contest becomes a deadly dance of positioning. The tyrant tries to circle, to get around the horns. The Triceratops pivots relentlessly, turning with its attacker, never letting the predator out of the arc of its weapons. Point the horns. Always point the horns. The T-Rex lunges. It's a feint, a test, jaws snapping toward the Triceratops's flank, and the Triceratops responds instantly, wheeling to meet it, driving forward a half step with its horns leading. The tyrant pulls back. Those 2-meter-long spikes, backed by tons of muscle, are not a bluff, and the predator knows it. One misjudged lunge, one moment of the Triceratops driving forward with full commitment, and those horns could punch deep into the T-Rex's chest or belly. For a predator, an injury like that is a death sentence, not a quick death, but a slow one, from infection and starvation, unable to hunt. The tyrant is powerful, but it cannot afford to be reckless. It has everything to lose. And so, they circle. The tyrant probing, snapping, trying to force an opening, the fortress pivoting, snorting, driving forward in short, threatening charges, always keeping that wall of horn and bone between its soft body and those terrible jaws. It is a battle of attrition, of patience, of nerve. The Triceratops cannot win by attacking it, cannot chase down and kill the more agile predator. It can only win by refusing to lose. By holding its ground, by making itself too dangerous, too costly, too exhausting to bring down, until the tyrant decides the meal is not worth the risk and slinks away to find easier prey. But if the tyrant is patient and skilled and lucky if it can force the Triceratops to overcommit to a charge, to overbalance, to expose a flank for just a single second, then it will explode into that opening with all 8 tons of its weight and drive its bone-crushing bite into the vulnerable body of its opponent. And then the outcome reverses in an instant. The fortress falls. We do not know how any single one of these duels ended. That is the honest truth. But we know from the fossils that both outcomes were real. We have the healed scars of the Triceratops that stood its ground and won, driving off the king and living to feed again. And we have the feeding traces of the Triceratops that lost, that gave the tyrant its meal. 2 evenly matched giants, each with the power to kill the other, locked in a contest repeated across 2 million years and countless setting suns. This was not a story with a fixed ending. This was a genuine war. And that, more than anything, is what makes Triceratops the one dinosaur that could truly defeat Tyrannosaurus Rex, not always, not easily, but really, and provably, in the flesh. Now, honesty compels a pause here, because Triceratops was not the only formidable creature sharing the tyrant's world, and any serious look at this question has to acknowledge the other great warrior of the Hell Creek, the one built along completely different lines, but no less capable of dealing out death. That animal was Ankylosaurus. If Triceratops was the fortress with the spears, Ankylosaurus was the living tank. It was a broad, low, heavily built dinosaur, and its entire body was encased in armor-thick, bony plates fused into its skin, covering its back and flanks like a coat of natural mail. Even its eyelids, in some armored dinosaurs, had bony protection. Trying to bite through the back of an Ankylosaurus would have been, for even a Tyrannosaurus Rex, like trying to bite through a boulder. And that armor was only half of its defense. Because at the end of its tail, Ankylosaurus wielded one of the most spectacular weapons in all of natural history, a massive club of solid, fused bone. Think about the engineering of that. A heavy sledgehammer of bone, mounted on a muscular tail, swung with enough force and speed to be genuinely lethal. Studies of ankylosaur tail clubs suggest that a full-grown individual could swing that club hard enough to shatter bone. A well-aimed strike to the leg of an attacking Rex could break it outright, and a predator with a broken leg is a dead predator. It cannot hunt, it cannot feed, and in that world, it would not survive long. So an Ankylosaurus, armored against the tyrant's bite and armed with a bone-breaking club, was every bit as dangerous in its own way as Triceratops was in its. It too could defeat a Rex. It too shared the tyrant's world. So why does this documentary crown Triceratops and not the armored tank? The answer comes down to the evidence and the nature of the confrontation. Ankylosaurus was a defensive specialist, a creature built to survive an attack by being impossible to hurt, by weathering the assault and dealing a punishing blow if the predator got too close. It was a fortress that dared you to try. Triceratops was something subtly different. It was not only built to endure an attack, it was built to face the predator head-on and drive it back, to meet the tyrant directly with weapons aimed at the kill. And crucially, it is Triceratops for whom we have that irreplaceable, direct fossil evidence of the conflict itself, the healed T-Rex bite marks that prove, beyond speculation, that this specific animal squared off against the king and survived. With Ankylosaurus, we reason about what it could do. With Triceratops, we can read the scars of what it actually did. That's the distinction. Both animals could kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But Triceratops is the one that met it face to face, in a repeated, evenly matched war and left us the physical proof of its victories. If any single creature has earned the title of the one dinosaur that could defeat T-Rex, it is the three-horned fortress that turned to face the tyrant instead of running from it. And yet, in the end, for all their weapons and all their armor and all their courage, there was one enemy that neither the tyrant nor the fortress could fight. An enemy that no horn could pierce and no club could break, and it was coming for all of them. For 2 million years, the tyrant and the fortress waged their war across the floodplains of the late Cretaceous. And then, in a single, cataclysmic moment, that entire world, the tyrant, the fortress, the duckbills, the forests, the rivers, and nearly everything else came to an end. Roughly 66 million years ago, an asteroid estimated to be around 10 kilometers wide slammed into the Earth, striking what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact released energy on a scale almost impossible to comprehend, vastly more than every nuclear weapon ever built, detonated at once. The immediate devastation was apocalyptic. An enormous fireball, colossal shockwaves, tsunamis surging across the seas, but the true killer was what came after. The impact hurled staggering quantities of dust, rock, and debris high into the atmosphere, and as that material rained back down and spread around the globe, it choked the skies and blocked out the sun. And that is how the age of dinosaurs ended. Not with a battle, but with a darkness. With the sun blotted out, the plants that formed the base of the entire food chain began to die. The great herds of plant eaters starved. And as the herbivores died, the predators that depended on them starved as well. The intricate, thriving ecosystem of the Hell Creek, the whole magnificent world we've been exploring, collapsed from the bottom up. This was the mass extinction event that ended the Cretaceous period, and it wiped out an estimated 3/4 of all species on Earth. Among the casualties were the non-avian dinosaurs. All of them. There is a terrible poetry in it. The Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Tyrant King, the most powerful land predator the world had ever produced. An animal that could crush bone in its jaws and that nothing in its world could challenge, was killed by something it could never see, never fight, never bite. And the Triceratops, the fortress, the warrior, the one creature brave enough to stand its ground against the king, was killed by the very same darkness. All those weapons, all that armor, the horns and the frill and the courage bred over millions of years, all of it meant nothing against a dying sky. In the end, the two great rivals of the Cretaceous shared the same fate, falling together into the long silence of extinction. Their war ended not with a winner, but with an ending that swallowed both sides at once. The tyrant and the fortress, the hunter and the one that could kill the hunter, vanished together from the earth, their 66 million year rivalry sealed forever in stone. But here is the strange gift of that ending. Because the very catastrophe that destroyed them also preserved them. The mud and sediment of those ancient floodplains buried their bones. And over 66 million years, that burial transformed them into fossils, into a record. And that record is why, all these ages later, we can stand in a museum and look up at the towering skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex and, beside it, the horned skull of a Triceratops, and know that these two animals were real, that they lived, that they met, and that they fought. We often tell the story of T-Rex as a story of an unbeatable monster, the perfect killing machine, the tyrant that ruled without rival. And it's a thrilling story. But it isn't the whole truth, because the fossil record whispers a more interesting tale, a tale of a king who had a genuine rival, an animal that did not fear it, that turned to face it, and that sometimes sent it away wounded and hungry. The horned fortress that refused to run. There is something deeply human in why that story grips us. We love the idea of the underdog that stands its ground. We love the notion that even the most fearsome tyrant can be challenged by courage and the right set of weapons. And in Triceratops, that idea isn't a fantasy or a fable. It's written into ancient bone, in healed scars that prove it happened. In a world ruled by the deadliest predator that ever walked the land, One animal evolved not to flee, but to fight and to win. That is the legacy of Triceratops. Not the gentle giant of the storybooks, but the warrior of the Cretaceous. The one dinosaur that could look the tyrant king in the eye and defeat it. The next time you picture Tyrannosaurus Rex, don't just imagine it hunting the helpless. Imagine it hesitating, circling, wary, calculating the risk as three horns swing to face it and refuse to yield. Because that moment was real. And in that moment, the king was not invincible. Not against this. The war between the tyrant and the fortress is just one story from a lost world overflowing with them. The age of dinosaurs was filled with rivalries, weapons, and survival strategies stranger and more spectacular than anything fiction has ever invented, and every year, new fossils rewrite what we thought we knew about these magnificent, terrifying animals. If this journey into the greatest duel of the Cretaceous gave you chills, if it made you see these ancient giants in a new light, then do one thing before you go. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in our next investigation, we're digging even deeper into the lost world of the dinosaurs, uncovering the predators, the armored titans, and the deadly rivalries that ruled the Earth long before humanity ever existed. You will not want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember this: the most fearsome monster of them all still had something to fear. Its name was Triceratops, and it did not run. We'll see you in the next one.